Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 301 of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Brian Hogan.
Hi everyone.
Dave Kimura.
Hello everyone.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. We have a call for proposals open for Ruby Remote Conf, so if you want to speak, please apply. This week we're going to talk about writing, and this is something that Brian recommended. Brian, do you want to give us a little bit of background as to where you come to for this and why you recommend it as a topic?
So one of the things that I've been doing for the last 10 years or so is writing about technology and teaching about technology. And I love writing code, and I discovered that I really like helping other people learn about new technologies. And what I've also found is that a lot of the best teachers are people who are sort of discovering things themselves. I mean, how many times have you all gone out there, right, and looked at a blog post that covers the exact error message that you're having a problem with, or the exact issue you're trying to tackle, right? You know, if somebody took the time after they solved that problem, someone thought enough to take the time and say, you know, I bet somebody else is going to run into this problem. I'm going to help them solve that. And I think there are a lot of great opportunities for software developers to add the skill of writing to their tool belt, become better communicators, write better documentation for their open source projects, but ultimately help each other become better software developers through their writing process. So that's what I would like to talk about today with everybody else.
Hey there, this is Charles Max Wood, and I just wanted to talk to you really briefly about Freelance Remote Conf. I'm putting on a conference for people who want to go freelance or who are freelance, and bringing in some of the experts from the Freelancer Show to talk to you about how to find clients, how to collect money, how to build your business, how to specialize, and much, much more. So if you're thinking about going freelance, or you're already freelance and want to hear from the experts on how to go, become, or grow your freelancing business, then by all means, come check us out at freelanceremoteconf.com.
Yeah, it sounds good. And, you know, I've done some blogging. I am working on a book, or at least I think I'm working on a book. I don't ever actually get time to work on the book. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I've written some of those posts where I got an error and then I figured out how to fix it. And so I went in and I said, this is what I was doing. This is the error message I got, and this is how I fixed it. And, you know, it's funny because especially when I was a new programmer, those were the blog posts that got the most traffic because it had the exact error message in there. And so, you know, Google does that awesome keyword matching and goes, yeah, this is exactly what's in that post, and boom.
And that's the thing. And you just by doing that, you have that epiphany, you have that moment of clarity where you go, I can explain this to somebody else and they can save them some time. You know, I mean, you look at a lot of these posts. I was looking at a Ruby and SSL issue last night for about an hour. I have an old machine that I'm bringing back from the dead because my current machine is in the shop. Mm-hmm. And I got to get everything set up again. And I was just running into this. I could not, for the life of me, get RVM and Homebrew to play together. And I Googled for maybe 5 minutes or so and found a post that had the exact solution I was looking for. But I looked at the comments below it, and there were people like, I was searching for 3 days for the answer to this. I was searching for hours to find the answer to this. Thank you so much for writing that kind of stuff. You know, that is like the easiest way to pay it forward as a software developer. If you figured something out, throw a blog post up there, write about it, and tell somebody else about it. It's the easiest way to pay it forward to the next person.
Yep. So
Yeah, I agree. I remember trying to figure stuff out before the internet was widely available. And I mean, it would be weeks and weeks just stumbling over one line of code or something. And, you know, it's just horrible. So I definitely agree. Blog posts and Stack Overflow and stuff has been a lifesaver in many cases.
So, you know, there's sort of the two kinds of ways to get back, right? I figured out a way to get around this error message versus I have an idea that I want to share with you, and I want to, I want to get you on my team, for example. Like I want you to use Elixir or an Elm, or I want you to use this great new Ruby gem, right? Mm-hmm. You know, those are the two kinds of writing, right? The helping you solve your problem and the teaching you about a new thing. And I've always felt that it's really important to frame them both as helping you solve a problem. There's a lot of folks that I kind of coach on writing when I'm doing editorial work, and a lot of them are really excited and really passionate about their thing. Like, oh, you should totally use Devise for your Rails application. It is the best way to do authentication. And what I find that they miss is wait, slow back. Why should I care? And so the question I always ask anybody who's writing about any topic, the first question I ask them is, why should I care, and how will this make me a better developer? Mm-hmm. Answer that question first before you go and tell me what the solution is to that problem, right? Answer that question first. Tell me how this is going to solve a problem that I have. What's the pain point that I'm going to have? Why should I care? So a lot of that writing, it takes the focus away from the presenter, and it focuses on the needs of the reader. And once you do that and you follow that, then the piece of writing becomes 1,000 times more effective. The person who's reading your work now has that buy-in. Just like they have that buy-in when they're reading your blog post about how to solve that tricky error message they're coming to. They've already got that buy-in because you've made a very clear connection how you're going to solve their problem. But if you start writing a post on why you should adopt Elm for your user interface, and you start talking about it's great, it's got type checking, it's got all these new features, but you fail to hit that really important thing about why should I care? How is it going to make my life better as a developer? How is this going to make my problem go away so I can go on to fix another problem that I'm going to have to face this afternoon? If you fail to do that, you fail to really engage with your reader.
Yeah, I've heard a few people call it WIIFM. What is in it for me?
Yeah.
And yeah, if you're not addressing that, if you're not saying, look, this is why it matters, then yeah, you're kind of setting yourself up to fail on that front. And if you can't convince people to care, then they're not going to go through the trouble of figuring out how to do it. Unless they're just trying to get some kind of mental exercise. But yeah, most people, they'll go find another mental exercise in something that's a technology that's going to pay off for them, or in a technique that pays off for them. So
exactly, if you've read something, or if you've read something, you've invested time in it, and you kind of feel like your time has been wasted. And the same thing happens if you've written something, right? If you've written an entire book and nobody buys it, if you've written a whole series of blog posts and you get no traffic, it's kind of demotivating, and you probably won't write something again. And it could just be. Not that your topic is bad or that your writing is bad. It could just be that you just didn't make that connection with the reader. That's the number one conversation I have when I'm working with somebody new on an article or on a book is who is your audience? How will you solve their problem? What are the 4 or 5 takeaways you want them to come away with? And then everything in your piece, everything in your entire article or in your entire book, all should come back to those kinds of common themes. Those in education, you call them competencies or learning outcomes. What are the outcomes that you want them to be able to do that they couldn't do before? Those kinds of things. If you tie all those things together, then you've got them engaged, and then then you're not wasting their time, and you're not wasting your time.
Yep, absolutely. So,
yeah, I definitely agree. You're giving me flashbacks of high school English, man.
It's like it's one of those things you sit there and go, oh, why does this matter? I'm never going to do it. And then you find yourself 10 years later in your career going, I think I'd like to teach somebody how to do something or write something. Or even this stuff, even for people who are listening who are not even thinking, I don't want to write a book, I don't want to write blog post. You might want to write the copy to your GitHub Readme file about your new open source project. These things still apply. Is this going to make my life better? Don't just tell me what the project is. Tell me how it's going to make my life better. Why I should adopt it into my tool chain. If you want to speak at a conference, when you're gonna have to write out some abstract for your conference talk to get people to show up to it, get the organizers to pick it. Chuck just mentioned there's a call for proposals for the Ruby Remote Conf. A lot of the stuff we're talking about here applies to those conference abstracts and conference proposals too. So it's not just about blogs and books. It's about ways to promote your product, ways to promote yourself. Even if it comes down to you're looking to get that next job, right? Your cover letter is going to have a little bit of this to it. Why should I read your cover letter? Why should I care? Get that common theme of what's in it for me, right?
Well, that's the thing that I tell people so I have 2 projects right now that I'm working on, and I've kind of put the how to get a job one on the back burner because so I'll back up. I just for a minute, just to give a little bit of context to what I'm going for. But so I did a survey last April, and I got a whole bunch of feedback from people, and the most common question was, how do I know what to learn next? Or how do I know what I'm supposed to know in order to get a job? Or things related to that, right? So what am I supposed to be learning, or what do I need to know? And then the other questions basically boiled down to, how do I get a job? And so I've been working on the how do I get a job thing for a while until I got too busy to even think about writing a book. But that's what I tell people about the cover letter is, look, your resume is kind of a list of this is the stuff that I've done, or this is the stuff that I'm good at. And your cover letter is, why should I care? Like, who is this person, and why should I even pay any attention?
Right.
So, go ahead.
Sorry. For me, it's also about presentation of the article or blog post or README file. If I'm checking out a new gem that someone referred me to, if its README is very light, it doesn't have much description of what the gem is trying to accomplish in a very clear and concise manner. And if the README or the details on actually how to use and interact with the gem is not very well laid out or documented, then I'm probably going to pass on to something else. So not only is the content important, but I think having a clear and concise as well as layout of your content is equally important.
What was it about? I want to say it was Rick Olson way back in like 2008 or so. He had coined this idea of README-driven development for a gem, and I took to that immediately. That idea of before you even really start writing the code, write the README file for it that explains how it's going to be used.
You want me to
And
write the spec first? Isn't that waterfall?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Oh, no, I know, right? No, but the idea is that you're going to put off your documentation. You're going to put it off. But use it as a trial run. Like, before you've even written the code, go, how's the user interface going to? What's the API going to look like? How would I invoke this object? Things like that. And it wasn't so much writing the test so much as it was just getting a clear picture in your head of how you're gonna work with it. And I liked that idea just because if you look at it and you go, oh, that's kind of gross. There's a good chance that it probably is kind of gross. So I thought that was kind of a neat approach to doing that, because we want to say we started this conversation out by saying here are some things that you need to have, like a good concise README. What does that mean? How what kind of advice can we give to the person who's written a whole bunch of code and has got this gem they want to share with people? What are the kinds of things, like Dave? What are the kinds of things that you look for when you're looking at their README? What are the kinds of things you want to see?
Well, one, if it's not a widely adopted gem, at the very top of the README, I like to see, what is the intended purpose of this gem? What is it trying to accomplish? Maybe that other gems just are not doing. And then for the actual body and the guts of the README, I like to see examples. Here is our use cases, and here is how we have used it, code examples, the different available APIs into that gem, and stuff like that. That's not to say I don't do my own due diligence and review the actual source code of the gem first to see if it has some major downfalls or security issues. But my first impression is going to be the README file. So if that's not good, and if they're not using proper markup, and just very little things like that, because a lot of the older gems that are out there, GitHub had changed their markup parser, so now it just displays as a bunch of monotype text. So that also makes a difference to me to see, like, is this actually being maintained, other than seeing the last updated date. If the README file is not maintained either, then I don't think it's going to get the traffic or usage that you want from a gem.
Sure.
Well, and that goes right back to that. What is in it for me, right? Is it well maintained? Because I don't want to be the maintainer. I just want to use this to solve my problem. But then the content as well. You mentioned, does it have examples? Does it have API? Does it show you how to use it? I mean, all of that stuff. It's you want to be able to look at it and immediately know this is how it's going to solve my problem, and this is how I use it. And if you can't get that, or you can't get there easily, then there's not enough in it for you to be able to go out and actually take a chance on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. And, on the other side of things, sometimes you have too much information. For example, and I really hate saying this because I really admire and I love this gem, but the Gem Search Kick, it is a tie-in to the Elasticsearch service, and it's for Ruby on Rails, and it basically allows you to take your Rails application and tie into Elasticsearch for the full text searching. But if you look at its README, it is pages and pages long. It's almost overwhelming to be able to really see how to use this gem properly, because there's just way too much information. So I think this is an example where too much information is sometimes a bad thing, and they really should have used the wiki or something like that within the repo to kind of segregate some of the data more, but just use the README for like the high-level bullet points that you really need to know to get this gem working.
Yeah, you see that a lot when you just kind of have a brain dump of stuff. This is why this is why editors exist for books, because the same sort of thing happens with manuscripts that I see, and it's just this massive brain dump, which is great. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's really hard to get out of people is just the technical information. You think it's not, but it's actually, that's like the hardest part when you're putting together that kind of stuff, is getting that technical information out of people. But once you have that, then it's time to look at it and go, okay, we need to organize this information. We need to put this in the right spot. We need to make sure how it connects. Is this the right place for it? You kind of, that README, right, is more of your marketing page. You're going to show a couple of basic examples, and then you're going to kick them off to the documentation for more examples, right? You're not going to try to throw everything into that. And it's the same thing with like a conference presentation. If you're trying to lay that out, you've only got so much time. You've only got so much of your audience's attention, whether it's in person or whether it's on paper. You really only have so much of their attention. So you have to figure out exactly what needs to go in here, and what do I need to omit or defer. Sort of that 80-20 rule, right? We want this to be applicable to almost everybody. It's okay if that 20% use case don't find their answer in this spot. They can find it somewhere else.
I think it's interesting that we've kind of started out with probably the couple of areas that more or less every developer, if you're developing open source or you want to be involved in the community, is going to need that isn't blogging or writing books, right? It's writing the README, it's writing documentation, it's writing good bug reports, things like that, where it's probably not a big treatise on how something works or how to use it or even what to dig into. It's just, hey, look, here's the basic problem, and either please help me solve it or here's how you solve it.
Yeah, one of the things that I object to in software development is when I hear software developers refer to writing and speaking as soft skills. Writing is a very technical skill when you're doing it in a technical manner. It's a lot in common with software development. It's an iterative process. It's going to go through peer review if it's done properly. It's going to go through through many phases. And it has its own rules and its own syntax. It's a very, very technical thing, and I think it's something that other software developers really should put a little time into, if they're not already, and prioritize it as a skill. It'll help your career for sure. It will absolutely help your career, and that's one of the things that I enjoy doing. Is I enjoy helping people get better at that, get better at presenting their thoughts as words. So I'd like to do that. I'd like to spend some time, with some practical advice, that people can start putting to use today. We already kind of talked about the idea of thinking about your audience and focusing on them. But it's a little deeper than that. It's a little more involved than that, right? You've got your ideas. Mm-hmm. So what do you do with them? Where do you start with those ideas? I'd love to hear, Chuck, what's your process when you're putting together something that you're writing?
So it depends on what it is, but most of these kind of follow the same process. The first thing that I generally do is I actually start talking to people about what I think I want to write. In fact, I'm doing that this week for the What Should I Learn book or project. And the reason is because, first of all, I want to know, A, do people want this? And B, if it's something like a book that's going to be more of a product and less of a blog post, or something that I just kind of put out as content on the internet for free, I want to know if they're going to buy it. But the other thing is that I found that when I talk to people, so the same thing with getting a job, for example, I was getting ready to write a book on that, and I wound up talking to a whole bunch of people, and it turns out that I was probably 75% right, but there was another 25% that they were asking questions about that I hadn't really even thought about. And so they're talking about, I get in for the interview and I don't get hired or things like that. And it's like, oh, okay. So yeah, how do I troubleshoot my process? Or with what do I learn as I'm talking to people about that? I'm finding that a lot of people are coming to it from different places. The answers are still fairly, the same, but I now know that I need to address those particular areas. So I just came out of the boot camp, or I've been programming in Java for, years, and now I'm trying to decide if I want to make a transition. So what do I learn and how do I know? And so if I can talk to people, then I get a really good idea of where they're coming from and a really good idea of what they need. And then I can focus a little bit more on those areas and make sure that I address them as part of the content. And when I'm writing readmes and things, it's the same thing. I tend to put something out there, but then I also tend to go to some friends or to some other people and just say, look, use this, read the readme, and then if you really love me, you'll tell me 3 things that I need to fix.
It's so in a nutshell, you're doing market research and analysis, and then you're using the same tools and the same processes that you use if you're building software. If you're building a software product to develop your written work.
Yeah, basically.
This is why it's so applicable to software developers.
It's true. I mean, if you've ever tried to build a SaaS or worked at a company that built a SaaS, and they went out and they got funding, but they never actually talked to any of their customers, and then they died a horrible death, and you were out of a job for a few months while you figured out what you were going to do next. I mean, they have the same problem. Yeah, I'm sorry, but it's true. And then
you see, yeah. I see this a lot.
Yeah, you mentioned
I see it a lot with books.
You mentioned, the rest of it like a software project, and that's a lot of how I approach it too, because once I know all this, then I sit down and outline it, and then I start fleshing out the parts that, I think I understand the best, and then, it's usually also kind of the core parts, and that way I can start tying everything back into it. And it's the same thing with software development. Usually, if you have a program, you have kind of a core algorithm that you're following, and then all of the stuff that's out on the fringe, it has to talk to this other service, or it needs to convert from Unicode to ASCII or whatever. That's all out on the edge, and so you kind of figure that out, and then you tie it back to your main algorithm, and that's how I write.
You said something that's just it's of utmost importance. You only just briefly mentioned it, but I want to bring it back because it's so incredibly important when you're planning to write something, and that's that you said you outline it. and a lot of people kind of gloss over that. But that is the stage. It's sort of the part you hate doing. You hated doing in college writing. You hated doing it in high school writing. So make an outline, and no one really bothered to tell you why that's so important. And at those stages, at least, no one told me why outlines are so important.
Oh, I hate filling in the
out,
backlog too. So
yeah. It's the thing is though is that's the place where you haven't invested too much of your sweat and blood and tears with your idea. That's the point when you share it with people. Like that's the point where if I'm working with you as a developmental editor, and for those that aren't aware, a developmental editor is really focused on tone and structure, making sure you're not repeating yourself, making sure that you're sort of a developmental editor is going to hold you accountable to talking to your audience and making sure you've explained everything. So it's not the tiny details like the grammar and the spelling and the copy editing, but the developmental editor is going to kind of hold your hand through the process and remind you, hey, did you talk about this yet? You're introducing this concept, but you're not talking about this other concept. It's that other set of eyes that works with you. And the outline is the greatest place to engage someone like that because you haven't written all of this stuff yet, but you have a bird's eye view of what you're going to write. And so what I've always recommended to people is at that outline stage, for each of your high level outline things, write a paragraph that introduces that topic.
Nice.
and just say, what are you going to learn from here? What are you going to learn in this section? So just write it out as a paragraph, and that'll eventually become your introduction to the chapter or your introduction to that section. But if you do that as you're outlining, it'll help you see, and it'll help anybody else who's looking at your outline get a feel for where you're going and how things can tie together. And you'll eventually be able to see very clearly where are the areas that you need some research. If you have a topic like if you're going to write a book on some JavaScript stuff, and you can't explain if you can't really write a paragraph explaining what you're going to talk about in the section, that's a quick indication, that's quick feedback to you right now that there might be something wrong with that section. The other thing I recommend is trying to tie it into the next. Try to incorporate transitions into the outlines so that you can say, when you're finishing up a section or you're finishing up a chapter, it helps the reader if you can kind of transition them and flow them to the next section, even if it's something simple as a sentence like, now that you've installed XYZ, let's go and write the configuration files. Just that helps bridge. But that becomes that's sort of your scaffolding when you're putting the whole work together. Because you can see how things are going to flow and tie together. And then you can go, it actually doesn't make sense to do that in this order. It makes sense to do it in a different order.
I was actually going to point that out because as I've outlined some of the things for both finding a job and, what should I learn? Yeah, I mean, I get in there and some of the things in the beginning kind of tie back and rely a little bit upon things that are later in the book and vice versa. And so sometimes it's tricky to figure out what that order is. But if it's in an outline or, once I start writing it, each chapter is kind of in its own file, then I can I can move things around easily. But especially in the outline, move it up, move it down, and just, recognize, hey, this is going to have some tie into, so I'm going to have to explain parts of this again once they get the other concept. But yeah, it's really cheap to move stuff in your outline.
Yeah, it is. It's very cheap, but it's also, like I said, it's a great place to get feedback, right?
Yep.
I do that all the time. I ask that from people that I'm working with. I ask to see their outlines right up front, and when I'm writing something, that's the first thing I share. It's the first artifact I share. I don't often do the approach that you do, Chuck. I don't often go and do the market research stuff first, because I find I get like a lot of out of scope stuff. So what I tend to do is I tend to define the outline first and scope it that way. And then if there are things that people bring up that I feel like they would fit in, then I'll sort of add them in. But I come to the table with something first. So that's sort of my approach. I don't think either approach is right or wrong, but that's sort of how I approach it. Is I'll do a preliminary outline first, then I'll say, hey, Dave, Chuck, take a look at this. What are your thoughts? What am I missing? What do you see in here that I shouldn't be talking about? What's out of scope? Those kinds of things.
So a little bit more nuanced view on how I do this. I actually usually wind up talking to 2 or 3 people and then do the outline, and then talk to probably 7 or 8 more people and refine it.
Sure.
But that's on books. If it's a blog post, yeah, I'll usually outline it first and then see what people think.
Right.
Because it's small and I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. And so if it's something that I'm worried, okay, is this really going to get the message across? Or maybe it's in an area that I'm just not completely comfortable, spouting my mouth off on things. And, I want to say, okay, is this, am I walking into some areas that I'm just not aware are kind of landmines? Because there are hotly contested areas that, I don't want to be in the middle of the fight. I just want to make people think about one idea or another. And so, that as well, I'll get people's input just to make sure that I'm not unintentionally whacking one side or the other in the face.
Yeah, we run into that a lot.
I'm good at that.
We run into that a lot, though, with people in technology. And what I think is the value of a piece of writing like a book over a Stack Overflow post is that you can contextualize it and you can give it a very specific scope, right?
Yes.
So if your way might not be the best way for such and such, but it is the best way for this situation, and I think it's okay to use your platform to explain it that way. I don't think that you have to be very wishy-washy and say, well, you might do this, you might do that. A person has picked up the thing you're reading. They're just be authoritative about it. If your facts are sound and it works, you're already a farther step ahead than the critics who didn't take the time to write it themselves.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't want people to come away thinking that this is a bit of arrogance, but you do have to. You're the one putting the time in. You're the one doing the research, and if you keep it fact based as opposed to having a lot of opinions around it, then you explain why you're doing something. This is the other piece of advice that I want everyone to take away from this is you told me why I should care. So you got me. I'm bought into this now. And this is sort of my biggest criticism with a lot of the tutorials out there on Webpack and other things in the JavaScript space. They get me hooked with a great introduction. They bring me through. They've got me totally locked in. They sell me on why I should care about Webpack, and then they give me 40 lines of configuration to just paste into a document and don't tell me what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And that's the thing is, okay, you've got to tell not just what. Your job as the writer is to tell me why, because if you paste in a bunch of configuration, then you leave yourself open for Hacker News comments about why your configuration is bad. But if you paste a bunch of configuration in and you explain the situation that you're covering and why you've put those configuration lines in there, it automatically deflects a bunch of comments.
Well, and
it puts you on better footing with your reader, because now the reader goes, yeah, I know what that does now. Oh, that's awesome.
I was going to say you've solved that what's in it for me. So even if it's not the quote unquote best way to do it, it turns out that, hey, I've got enough context now to figure out if there's a better way to do it.
One of the things that happens to me a lot when I'm editing something from somebody is I'll give them some comments and they'll say, could you explain this section better? And what they'll do is they'll write me back personally in the notes. They'll write me back this long explanation as to why they did it this way. And my response is, that's great. Please write that so the reader can see it.
Yeah.
So, if you've got it, if you internally, if you have a justification, if you're writing something internally, if you have a justification, write down your justification as part of the work that you're doing. Tell people why you're doing it a certain way. Tell people about your approach and why it's a good fit.
I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah, this is great stuff. I'm learning a lot listening to just you two. I almost forgot that I was on the show here. But as far as someone who is wanting to get into blogging a bit more, maybe as a precept to writing their own book, what kind of hosting do you think they should use? Do you think they should use something like Medium out there, which has been pretty much tried and improved? Or do you think they should do a WordPress style or even like their own kind of self-hosted Jekyll through GitHub or something? What are your thoughts on the different available tools out there?
Fight.
Well, I'm not a big fan of Medium, because I think if you're trying to do blogging as an attempt to kind of build your own brand, I think you should probably build your own brand on your own website and your own web presence. But I don't think an occasional Medium post hurts. I just don't think I'd put all my stuff there. I think I'd try to have a presence. So that way, when I launch the book or whatever I'm going to launch, at least I've got a place to do that too. That's just my thoughts on that. I'm also sort of an old school web guy, and I don't like the idea of if Medium crumbles one day, all those posts, what happens to all those posts? Where do they go? And we just kind of saw that with Medium recently with their, hey, we're changing direction, et cetera, et cetera. My first thought was, oh God, all those posts are going to disappear. Thankfully they didn't, but that was a little bit of a worry too.
Oh, I have feelings on this too. So
go ahead.
So here's kind of my take on things. It comes back to that same question again. What's in it for me, right? You're the listener. You're sitting there going, okay, Medium, what's in it for me? Versus WordPress, what's in it for me? Versus whatever. So I look at some of the trade-offs. I mean, Medium is free. You have to pay. Well, you can have a free WordPress on like WordPress.org or comm or something. I don't remember. But if you're going to set up a WordPress site, just point your own domain to it and spend the money on it. So that's $10 a year, and you can get WordPress hosting for as little as like $3, $4, $5 a month. So ultimately, it's not a cost center issue unless you just really can't even afford that. And I recognize there are probably people who can't. But anyway, beyond that, it comes down to what you want, okay? So, I mean, if you want to be prolific and you want to get lots of views, and I don't know what marketing tools Medium exposes to you. So, for example, I don't know if you're trying to like promote a book or something, I understand that Medium tends to get you more traffic than, say, a WordPress setup. And so, if you want your blurb at the end for, Joe or Jane developer to say they're the author of this book, link back to Amazon where they can buy your book, then maybe Medium will work out for you if you're more interested in the book sales than you are in the personal brand. But if you're looking at building a personal brand, you want to be a speaker, you want to get a book deal, with Pragmatic Programmer or somebody else, it makes a lot more sense to set up a WordPress site, point your own domain at it, so joedeveloper, janedeveloper.com. And then from there, make sure that you're posting regularly and building a following and building an email list and, kind of building your brand and your marketing machine, because those things are very, very attractive to both conferences and to publishers. And so if you have all of those things going and they know that, hey, look, this person writes a book, and then they go tell all the people that follow them about it, and you have that personal brand. So when they're browsing Amazon, they see your book, see your name, and go, oh, I like that guy, I'm going to go buy the book. Then I would go with a WordPress.com. But if you already have something out there and you're just trying to promote sales on something that already exists, Medium may work better for you. Just keep in mind that future products and future sales are going to be a little bit harder then, because you're going to be stuck in the paradigm of Medium rather than in the paradigm of WordPress and owning your own website and your own domain.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
Hey everybody, this is Charles Max Wood. I just wanted to talk to you really briefly about JS Remote Conf. We just picked speakers. Things are looking really good, and we're really excited to cover a broad range of topics for JavaScript developers. So if you're looking to learn things about Node.js, about becoming a better developer, about deployment, about mobile development, and much more about JavaScript, then come check us out, jsremoteconf.com. You can also find it by going to devchat.tv/conferences and then picking the conference you want. We have last year's recordings there. We have this year's conference coming up. So make sure you get your ticket, and we'll see you there.
Rather than in the paradigm of WordPress and owning your own website and your own domain.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
And see, my main concern with using something like Medium is I have no control over what direction they go. So whenever I happen to stumble across a link that takes me to something like Forbes, I immediately just close that browser tab because, I don't want to have to disable ad block, my ad blocker or other stuff like that, or, click to continue, that kind of junk. So, that kind of really makes me weary about using something like Medium if they ever go into that kind of direction, because then, just as my own personal belief, I would have to migrate all my data off of Medium and go to a different direction that would hopefully be compatible with whatever data extracted out of Medium. So, I've recently been playing around with Jekyll, and, it's been really cool. I really like it, but I think there's a lot of missing pieces in it, like SEO and other kind of optimizations that I think a lot of people skip out on that WordPress and Medium provide just kind of natively.
Yeah, the other thing that I will point out between WordPress and Jekyll, because I don't think it's helpful to compare Jekyll to Medium just because Jekyll is self-hosted and Medium isn't, and I think that's kind of the definitive decision there. But WordPress can be self-hosted as well as Jekyll. I found that Jekyll requires a bit more maintenance than WordPress, and I would rather be writing on my blog than maintaining it, and that's why I use WordPress. I mean, that's ultimately what it boils down to for me, more than anything else. They've got a lot more themes, a lot more support, and a lot more plugins. And so if I want something, I pull it in, and I'm done, and then I can go write.
And a lot more security issues.
We need to dispel that, though. I mean, yes, there are security issues. There are also ways to automatically keep your stuff up to date. There's not a kind of nowadays your WordPress site getting hacked is a lot of times a result of you're just not
maintaining it,
keeping it automatically updated somehow. You didn't tick the box that says roll the upgrades automatically. Because I've got a couple that I haven't touched in years, and they've never had a problem because every 3 days I get your WordPress automatically updated to the latest version email in my inbox. And so it's not as insecure as people like to make it out to be. Yeah, it's like every other well-known web thing. There are a lot of people trying to break into it, so it's a higher target. You can get some nice Jekyll. You can get some nice Jekyll themes that have a lot of stuff already taken care of for you. I did that. Just found a couple on GitHub, and bam, everything's taken care of for me. I just got to put my content into it, and that was kind of nice. But the important thing is your content. It doesn't really matter where your content is. It matters that people can get to it. It matters that people can read it. And it matters that people can engage with you on it. because that's the part of it is. If you can write something and you can help people, that's one thing. But if you can write something and then build a community around it and get people to engage you on your topic, that's a whole other thing.
So true.
And,
yep.
That's a whole other level that you can get to, and that's where the real learning can begin. Because if you write things in the right way, you'll be surprised how willing people are to come and help you and point things out and give you some additional suggestions. And then those are people you can go to. You can say, hey, I'm in the future, hey, I'm thinking about writing an article on such and such, or I'm thinking about writing a blog post on such and such. Do you have any suggestions? Those are the things you can engage with your readers and your community a little bit more.
Well, and to be perfectly honest, those are the people I go to when I'm starting to think about a new project. Is the people who have emailed me and said, hey, I really enjoy the show, or hey, this link on this page isn't up. Because those are the people who are more highly engaged in what I'm doing, in the podcasts. Or, if I have a blog post out there or something, those are the people who are engaged enough to actually open their email up and say, hey, there's a problem here. And so those are the people that I want the feedback from, because they're the people who are more likely to enjoy, consume, and even purchase things that I put out there. So you definitely want that level of engagement, just so that you can find, those handful of, stalwart readers or whatever who really, really care. And then you write your stuff for them, because there are a whole bunch of other people who aren't going to email you that are just like them.
Exactly. So you put an outline together. You make sure you include why someone should care and how their life is going to be better by what you're doing. You identify the things that you're going to cover. You make sure that all the topics are in there are aligned with that. And when you show some code, you explain why you're doing it, not just what you're doing. What other pieces of advice can we give our readers? What do they do? What do they do when they've got something ready to go? When they think they've got a product, a manuscript or something, where do you think they should go?
I'm a big fan of beta readers. Get feedback.
Are you like an open beta, or do you
No.
try to use a list? What if you don't have a list? What if you're starting, or what if you're brand new? What if they don't have a brand already? What if they have this idea for something, they figured something out, and they really want to share it with the world? What do they do?
If they've already written their book, they went way too far without getting feedback.
Right?
I mean, sorry, but that's how I see it. You've gone way too far.
Right.
You should have already been talking to people about this, and getting feedback. And, I think we're going to get Brian to go on a rant a little bit later about this, but have an editor look at it. But you should have plenty of feedback, as you're writing it. And then you just take it back to those people and say, okay, I've got a few chapters, or I've got something for you to look at. And then you have them look at it. And then once you're getting close to the point where you're getting ready to actually open it up and start selling it, or put it out there for free, or whatever you're going to do with it, hopefully by then you've also been marketing and building a mailing list and things so that you can sell it to everybody else who's interested in what you've got going on. If you haven't been building a brand and building a list and doing all this other stuff and soliciting feedback throughout the whole process, then you're really not going to, it's not going to be as good, and you're not going to have as many people interested when you release it.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate, because that's a great strategy if you're going to self-publish it.
Yeah.
But if you're not looking to self-publish it, pitch it to the Pragmatic Bookshelf. Pitch it to O'Reilly. Pitch it to some other place. I'm going to say pitch it to the Pragmatic Bookshelf because I'm completely and totally biased. But I'll be completely and totally honest with you that that's where you should send your book, especially if it's covered if you've covered all the things I've said here. Because there's a link on the very bottom of the Pragmatic Bookshelf's website that says "Write for Us," and it explains all the steps that you need to do to put a proposal together.
Okay.
And a good part of that is it's information that's not just valuable to someone who's going to submit a book to the Pragmatic Bookshelf. It's good, sound advice for putting any kind of written work together. If you're going to self-publish, probably read that information anyway, because it'll help you put together the things that Chuck is talking about.
All right, so I have to poke you for a minute. I actually, if you don't have a market, so I'm kind of in a unique position, right? I'm on 3 podcasts that between the 3 of them probably get 40 or 50,000 downloads every week. All right. So if I go out and try and sell something myself, it's because I don't want Pragmatic Bookshelf to take it and then give me half of the money back. And I think I can make more money, and I can reach plenty of people on my own, right? But if you don't have a market, or you don't reach a lot of people, you reach enough people to kind of get the feedback I'm talking about. But when it comes down to selling something, you're not in that position. Then you definitely should look at going to one of these publishers. And Pragmatic is the one that pretty much all of my friends have gone to because they give a higher commission and they sell directly to the audience that they're trying to reach. And so it makes a ton of sense to go that way if you don't have a large audience and you're thinking you want to go publish a book. And they can tell you usually, or work with you a little bit if your proposal isn't quite up to snuff, but they'll tell you whether or not they think they can sell it. And they will also tell you if they're kind of on the fence, they'll ask you for more of the right information. And so, yeah, I told you I was going to poke you, but I actually agree with you for most people in most situations. If you don't have a large audience that you can market to on your own, then going through someone like Pragmatic Bookshelf is the right answer.
Well, we've taken some authors on that have really, really large brands. I know that we've done that. I know that we published some books by some pretty big names with a pretty good following, and I haven't heard them complain too much, but it's just a matter of what you're looking to get out of it. Mm-hmm. If you've already got an infrastructure in place to sell things, that's a big plus in your favor. If you've already got someone that you can rely on to help you index and typeset and all that kind of stuff, that's great for you. One of the things that I've run into a lot with some self-published books I've bought recently, and I don't like to say negative things about specific things in public, but I do provide feedback to the authors of these things because I want to see them make their books better. But I see an awful lot of people who go, I don't want to go to a publisher because they're going to take all the money and they're going to not give me anything in return. And then they'll self-publish something, and it's hard to follow. It's barely coherent. Things are missing. There are literal errors when I try to run the code. No one's looked at it. They looked at self-publishing as sort of the cheap route. I'm going to take all the money. I'm doing all the work, so I'm going to keep all the money. Except they forgot to do all the work. In order to produce a quality book, you need people that are professionals in their areas of expertise. You want someone who can lay things out in a nice way. You want someone who can index your content. If it's a big book, you definitely probably want an indexer to work on that. And there are people. I didn't realize that. That's like a profession. People just index books. That's what they do. And then there are your copy editors, and there are your developmental editors, and there are your marketing people. And all these people who have these professional jobs, whose job it is to help you sell copies of your book. If you're self-publishing, those are all services you can hire and build into the cost of producing your book. And I think you should. I think if you're self-publishing, I think you should, at the bare minimum, pay someone to be the developmental editor of your book while it's in progress. And maybe you do that on a commission basis, or 12% or something like that of the book sales to hook them in, or you would pay them out of your pocket, depending on how you work that agreement out. But there are lots of fantastic freelance developmental editors out there. And get some people to review your book, technical review of your book. Mm-hmm. People that aren't your friends, people who don't have any investment in you whatsoever, have them read your book. Every book that I've published with the Pragmatic Bookshelf, every book that I've published has had about around 20 or 25 strangers look at the book and run through the code and tell me all kinds of ways that my book sucks, which is great, because then by the time it actually gets out there in front of people, it doesn't suck. Because that's the thing is you if you're doing all this work, you want it to be successful. You want to help people. So you want to avoid any kind of particular traps that will get in the way of you being able to do that. Whether it's a piece of code that doesn't work, or it's an explanation that you left out, or it's something that's out of order. Catching those kinds of things and getting them in front of and getting the polished product in front of the reader will help them be better at what it is that they're trying to accomplish. So publishers offer that stuff. So if all you want to do is write, and you don't want to be the person maintaining your shopping cart, you don't want to be the person editing your own stuff. Me personally, I can edit other people's stuff like nobody's business. But when it comes to my own stuff, I will miss everything. I can't edit my own stuff. And I'm aware of that as a limitation in my skill set, that I can't edit my own things. So I have a relationship with an editor at the Pragmatic Bookshelf who's edited almost all of my books. She's amazing. She's the person that I will try to go to every time to have something published that I work with. And I know a self-published author who's written many books, and he has a great relationship with a independent freelance developmental editor that can do kind of the same sorts of things to help make sure that book is a polished product.
So I have questions now.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, there were 6 rogues. And they thought that it would be a great idea to write a book. And they had an idea, and they got together for a retreat, and they actually outlined the book and started working on writing parts of it. And they went to a publisher, and I won't name Wiley as the publisher, but they went to the publisher, and they tried to work out a deal with the publisher, and the publisher came back with a deal. I don't remember the exact percentage, which is probably good because I don't think they wanted us to share the percentage, but I think it was somewhere in the range of like 10 to 15% of these sales, right?
That's and I'm going to guess there was probably an advance too, right?
Yeah, but the advance barely covered anything.
Yeah. It never does.
So anyway, we wound up bagging the project because we figured that even if we sold as many copies as we thought we could sell, we were talking about putting a couple $100 in our pockets for all the work that we were going to put in, because we were going to split the commission between, the 6 of us. And so anyway, I mean, that's part of the reason. And I've heard dozens of stories like this, where somebody publishes a book and then they don't even make the advance back. And so, they got $5,000 to spend 6 months, 5 days a day, 20, 25 hours a week for 6 months, and they made $5,000. So they were making like $1.50 an hour writing the book. And, if it's a passion project or you feel like it's really going to impact people and that's what you're doing it for, then that probably doesn't matter as much. But if you're trying to write a book and you're thinking, it'd be nice if it put a little money in my pocket, then, I could just go work extra hours for clients, right?
Yeah, I struggle with this too, because one of the things I want to do is I want to see people write. I want to see people write stuff, and I think that agreements like that from some of the publishers that will remain unnamed do a disservice to authors, and it discourages people because they hear stories like that and they go, no, you can't make any money on doing this. The aforementioned page from the Pragmatic Bookshelf that I mentioned has a section in on what do I get, and I'm just going to read the section for you. There's a pie chart on the page, and it says it shows how much our authors received in royalties at the end of 2013, wherein 74% of our titles made more than $25,000 for their authors. There's a different royalty scheme at Prags. There's no advance. That's written in there. There's no upfront advance, but it is a 50% royalty split. So I'm happy with the relationship that I'm happy with the sales numbers and the profits that my books have done. I don't think I would have been able to achieve those numbers without working with a publisher. Right. But I've also written a book a long time ago for a different publisher, and I can tell you that I receive a royalty statement every year from that particular publisher for $1.29. So it's about the deal it's about the deal you make and the thing that you're offered. Right. And that's the real thing. Like I said, regardless of who you go through, work out a process that allows you to develop a quality product for your reader, because your ultimate goal is to help them. Mm-hmm.
So are we talking more about publishing versus self-publishing, or about having a process that includes these services that you're talking about?
Yep. I'm happy to say either one, right? I'm happy to see either one. Depending on how much time you've got, if you can pull the process together, if you can coordinate that, yeah, right? Like if you're going to build a kitchen, are you the general contractor that coordinates all the services together, or do you hire someone to do pull all the services together and then pay them to do that? Right. It's that sort of the same mindset. If you already have an infrastructure together, go nuts. If you're a well-known person in the Ruby community, I'm sure you can pull enough of your contacts together to make something work in a self-published manner. But like I said, either way, and I'm gonna play devil's advocate against myself. Just because you work with a publisher does not always guarantee that you'll produce a quality product either. Right. There are plenty of books that come out from publishers that have errors in them. They have mistakes. By the time they hit the print, they're out of date. That's just a problem with our industry as it is. So you can't just say that, I went with a publisher, so I'm fine. It's the process that really is the utmost important part.
Gotcha. So now I want to ask, okay, so if I decide to pull together this process or part of this process, how do I do that? But I don't know if we have time to dig into that.
I mean, the thing is you can get a lot of trade magazines. You can find trade magazines for writers and editors, and you can usually find people through those. That's kind of what I've heard for people do. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I've even seen it on Twitter. I even said, hey, I'm looking for someone to edit my book. And I've seen responses come back. Just using that network. Hey, anybody self-published know a good development editor that I can work with? Things like that work out, because again, those are professionals looking to put their shingle out there, just like you are putting your shingle out there.
Yeah, it makes sense. So, do you have any kind of final encouragement for people to get out and write? And not necessarily even a book, but just blog posts or anything.
Do it. Do it now. The best people to teach something are the people who just went through that experience.
Yes, true.
If you've got that experience, and even if it's small, it's valuable to somebody else. There's a little bit of an analogy in teaching. When I was teaching classes, I always encourage people to ask questions, and I always would tell people, you're probably not going to ask a question because you don't want to appear stupid in front of everybody else. It's a bit of an insecurity that we all share. Well, if I raise my hand and ask this question, then everyone will know I don't know. And I would always tell students, there's a really good chance that 5 other people have the same question that you have, maybe more, but they're also too afraid to do that. And so I see the same thing happen with developers, and I say, hey, that's really cool. You should write about that. And they'll say, I don't know. I don't know if I can do that. What if I don't know what I'm doing? What if I don't know what I'm talking about? I'm not an expert in that. I can't do that. And my response is, you absolutely can, and you should.
Yep.
And from a reader perspective, please put your dates on your blog posts.
Amen, brother. Amen. Oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. There's nothing worse than, you go, you find what you think is the answer, and then you try it out, and then once you start tracking it down, it's the version of Ruby or Rails or Node.js or whatever from 2 years ago, and it just doesn't work that way anymore.
Yeah, and there's a whole conversation we could have about again, introductions and titles and things like that. Like, you're not just installing Ruby, you're installing Ruby 2.3 on Mac OS Sierra.
Yeah,
you're installing a lifestyle
with homebrew version whatever. It's not just the dates; it's the versions of stuff, right?
Yep.
Yep.
I ran into that issue a lot when I was trying to debug a Apache server I had, and all the tutorials turned out were for Apache 2.2 and not 2.4, and the syntax was incompatible, and it took the site down, and it was just a mess. So versions and dates are definitely good to have.
Yep.
Yeah, I've been there, fought that. All right, well, let's go ahead and do some picks.
Hey there, this is Charles Max Wood, and I just wanted to talk to you really briefly about Freelance Remote Conf. I'm putting on a conference for people who want to go freelance or who are freelance, and bringing in some of the experts from the Freelancer Show to talk to you about how to find clients, how to collect money, how to build your business, how to specialize, and much, much more. So if you're thinking about going freelance, or you're already freelance and want to hear from the experts on how to go, become, or grow your freelancing business, then by all means, come check us out at freelanceremoteconf.com.
Yeah, I've been there, fought that. All right, well, let's go ahead and do some picks. Brian, do you want to start us off with picks?
Sure. I'm gonna provide 2 picks about 3 picks about writing. They're 3 books. One of them's a classic. One of them's a classic book called On Writing Well.
Good book.
It's a little short book, but it's a fantastic book. The current version has just got some great examples in it. In fact, the current version even has kind of a meta example where he shows the editorial process of his manuscript for the chapter you're reading, which is kind of neat to see. But it's just a great book full of real practical advice. The second book is a book called Keys to Great Writing, and it's a book that I've given lots of authors to help them tell a story. There's a lot to be said for, even if you're writing a technical content, there's a lot to be said for making it a narrative, making it a story. Just again to kind of key into that concept that humans like stories. We like those. That's how we told history for years, and it's how we can make connections with our readers. So Keys to Great Writing is a fantastic book to kind of get your creative flow on. And the last book is a book actually about developmental editing. It's a book designed to kind of teach you how to be a developmental editor. And it's called The Artful Edit. And it's got a bunch of case studies and just really good advice if you're looking to be a better editor, if you're looking to kind of level up your writing to the point where you can really start thinking about structure and style and organization. And so I wanted to leave everybody with some real practical things, and I think that those 3 picks will help people get on the right foot too.
Awesome. Dave, what are your picks?
Just have one pick, and it is power tools. Specifically, the DeWalt reciprocating saw. I just got one not too long ago because I have a server rack in my basement. I needed to cut some angle iron, and just for my cheap poor man's rack, but I got an angle grinder first, and that thing scared me to death. So I returned it, and I got this DeWalt reciprocating saw instead. It is awesome. The power in your hands of this thing, it can cut through like anything. It's awesome. So it's like having a chainsaw without the risk of unaliving yourself.
Nice. Oh, I could pick power tools for weeks. I've got lots of toy tools. All right, well, I'm going to jump in with a few picks here. So I just found a new system that I am using now for, currently have the sponsorship processes put into. I'm working on getting some of the other systems like onboarding guests and stuff into that. And it's called 17 Hats. And the thing that's different from it, I'm moving off of ActiveCampaign for my CRM and moving over to 17 Hats. And the reason that I'm doing that is that ActiveCampaign has a lot of power tools in it, so to speak, where you can set up workflows and things like that. And 17 Hats is the same thing, but 17 Hats workflows are specifically designed for getting people through a specific process. And most of the workflows that I found in ActiveCampaign primarily center around just sending an email and waiting so long and then sending another email. And so I'm really, really digging it because I can put people into the process and then it can just tell me where they are in the process. And ActiveCampaign actually has deals in it as well, and I put all the sponsors in there, but I just couldn't quite figure out how to make it work because the deals portion is centered around the workflow or the process, and so if you need to customize it at all, you really can't. And in 17 Hats, it's focused around the project, which is connected to the user, and so if you need to change the workflow for them, you can. And so anyway, there were a bunch of other things that worked out nicely there, and they just added multi-user support, so now I've been able to pull the team that helps me pull off the conferences and the podcasts and make it all work there. So yeah, I'm pulling them in and getting them to the point where they have these processes. So as they go out and invite people to speak at the conferences, they just boom, done. It's they just add a workflow to them, and then everything just kind of happens, and it prompts them along the way. Okay, now you need to send them a quote, or now you need to send them a questionnaire to get more information, or anyway, it's a really great system. So I'm really digging that. Another thing that I'm going to pick just as a nice tool for planning is Google Spreadsheets. So I was working through some things, and I use Google Docs, incidentally, for my outlines, just because it makes it super easy. I can just put a dash in there, and then it uses it as a bullet point, and then, for my next point, if it's a sub point, I just tab in, and it just does the right thing. And so I found that it's really easy to organize things that way. But so I'll pick that as a tool, but also Google Spreadsheets. I've been trying to figure out calendars for my Cub Scouts, and we use a system called Scoutbook, and they expose a calendar in there. But the problem is you don't get this view over time of, okay, we're working on this award, now we're working on this award, now we're working on this award, for more than a month at a time. And even then, it just shows you when the meetings are, and you have to click on the meetings to get the details. And so with this, I've been able to just, put in all the dates for the rest of the year for all of our meetings. And then I've been able to put in when I have new boys coming in and new boys going out. If you're familiar with Cub Scouts, the units for the LDS Church, our boys actually come in when they turn 8 instead of at the beginning of the school year. So I have to keep track of that so that I know when I start certain awards and things. But anyway, just for planning, 4 weeks at a time, I found that Google Spreadsheets is really easy, and I could color code everything and then share it with the Cub Master and the committee chair and my other den leader and anybody else who really cares to see it. So I'm really digging that. Google Spreadsheets, just awesome power tool there. So yeah, those are my picks. I'm also using it to manage the scheduling for sponsors for the shows, and I'm going to be embedding those spreadsheets into the website so people can see what weeks we have available and then come in and say, all right, I want to sponsor these episodes and whatever. So anyway, all of that to say that Google Docs is awesome. Google Spreadsheets is awesome as well. So those are my picks. And yeah, if you want to submit for Ruby Remote Conf, and then in July it's actually Newbies Remote Conf. So if you have a topic you think would be helpful to new programmers, then submit a talk for that as well. And we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. And especially thanks for all the advice, Brian. I appreciate it. And we'll catch y'all next week.
All right. See you later.
Take care, everyone.